What I'm hoping to do today is to share my story and the story of organizing, of what I do and why I do it, and in the fashion that you will hear about in other sessions about migrant organizing. So transition to organizing in our organization, which was called Migrant and Refugee Communities Forum, came from our understanding that we actually need some power to achieve change. And that's because things for migrants and refugees in the United Kingdom, where we're based, were getting worse and worse, and the traditional ways of capacity building and advocacy just stopped working for us. So we basically started looking around, and that transformation led to the change in the name of our organization into Migrants Organise, which is basically really just what we do. And we do that through mobilizing, mentoring, training, and celebration. We do 4 things, and we hope we do them well. We speak out, we connect people, we'll build common ground, and we grow power. And we function as a platform, which a language is really important to us. So we don't empower, we work on power. And power is an ability to act. So we need to be acting together and lifting each other on the platform rather than being an umbrella organization. And that translates into campaigns. And some purist organizers will tell you that organizing is this, but not that. We work from a perspective of a migrant or refugee, which is very holistic, which means we're going to do whatever it's necessary within legal framework to access and achieve our rights, and starting with dignity. And at the moment, we run these 4 major campaigns around being heard, especially for women, around access to healthcare, around the vision for better immigration system, and around democratic rights, which is right to vote, which some migrants in this country have for some elections. And I'm sure, Petra and Josh can tell you a little bit more about that's much more developed piece of work in the United States. But all the pieces of work are extremely political, which sometimes surprises people and they call us radical, but actually all of these are within the charitable law. So there's nothing wrong with what we're doing, because if we want change, we need to be heard in that political arena, in that framework, and we need to be able to participate regardless of our status. This is me. I am CEO of Migrants Organise, and I have been CEO for 20 years, which is very unusual. People always say, oh, where are you going to move? But my work moves around me and changes so frequently. It's so exciting that they probably will have to chase me out with a broom. I'm from Sarajevo, which is in Bosnia, and in this middle circle, there's me somewhere dancing in 1984 Sarajevo Winter Olympics ceremony. So I always get a little bit tearful around Olympics, because it's one of the happiest memories of what humanity can do together when we put our minds together. Obviously, this was before drugs, etc. This is my neighborhood in 1992. This is me coming back for the first time. Sarajevo was extremely destroyed during the siege that lasted nearly 1,500 days. And it was plastered across newspapers and televisions across the world, but you were all very young, so you probably don't remember. That's why I put this photo there. I escaped in 1993 because I worked with foreign journalists, and they helped me to get out of the siege. But I was blissfully unaware of the Unwelcome Committee, which is equally bad in some other countries, but it's a particularly British characteristic of tabloid press to scapegoat and vilify and dehumanize migrants and refugees. And I started organizing as a result of deportation threats when I was refused asylum. And these are the early days of anti-deportation campaigns, and also at the same time advocacy and education around media coverage that, as you can see here, dates to 2000. Because I was a journalist, I had access to friends who covered my case and my story, and people just couldn't believe that somebody from Bosnia is facing deportation, because very few people actually talked about it. There's a lot of shame associated with especially being refused status, which we have seen with the most recent Windrush scandal, when many people from Caribbean were deported, detained, and refused status simply because they couldn't prove it 50 years later. So the British government has introduced a policy called a hostile environment policy. So part of the challenge for us is that this is not some kind of hostility against immigrants. It's not some kind of safety net that's been broken or system that's not functioning. It is the system, and advocates are still in this country having challenges waking up to that fact. And I found this post from Facebook from a couple of days ago, where a colleague posted that far-right activists are barging into hostels where asylum seekers are being housed during pandemic, and they're filming them and posting the YouTube videos about them using and abusing the British hospitality. Now, part of what I'm interested in doing is telling a different story and actually acting on it. So we're using all avenues and platforms for us to build alliances and tell a different story. So in solidarity with our friends in the States, on the day Trump was inaugurated, we did this massive action called Bridges Not Walls, and we created this banner with our members and dropped it off Westminster Bridge, which was a bit dodgy because of the bans and exclusions, but we brought lots of flowers and shared it with police officers, so we were able to do it. But more importantly, we did this with LGBTQ movement, with green movement, with feminist movements, so we joined up with other movements and were able to take action and to be seen and be heard. And I think we were covered by 32 media outlets. And to this day, we have this iconic banner and we drag it around. It's massive, it's hard to operate. So I suggest make smaller banners. And so we regularly take actions in public, and they need to be safe because many of our members have precarious status. We don't have clients, we don't have users, we have members, and that's about having agency to act and participate on a more equal footing. We work around the country with different groups. We use all our organizing tools to listen, action plan, and deliver actions about what people want and not what we as Londoners or experts think they should be doing. This is a group of asylum-seeking women who were dumped in a hostel run by a private company, security company, G4S. And they were barging into their rooms at 6 o'clock in the morning in bulletproof vests, allegedly checking that they're not illegally watching television because asylum seekers are not allowed to have televisions. So these women just had enough. They started organizing, we listened, and they developed a charter as to how they should be treated by contractors. And as a result, G4S actually lost the contract. And one of the really powerful moments for me was how bad things have gotten is for them to say, all we want is for guards and G4S staff to call us by our names. And that's just a level of dehumanization. We also work on welcome, and we a couple of years ago we fought and got community sponsorship visa, and this is a group of staff from Amnesty International who raised £47,000 to sponsor Syrian families to come over and look after them. We work on international level like today, but also on very local level. So this is one borough in London, and this is a local member of parliament, David Lemmy. And we work with a group of residents to create a welcome pledge, which is modeled on City of Sanctuary model in the United States. We got them to sign these pledges before elections, so then they had to put them into action. And the action was to stop employing immigration control officers in their social services to deny access to help to immigrants who are refused status, which is basically the essence of the hostile environment. We also work with lawyers very closely, and also organize our own money as much as we can. And these are our members on a legal walk, helping fundraise. This is really tricky because we do not subscribe to lived experience out of context. So all our members, when they speak out, they're trained and they speak from the movement rather than just from lived experience. And I'm happy to talk about the distinction there. Our key campaign in lockdown is a Patients Not Passports campaign, because migrants have been denied access to healthcare and charged extortionate amounts of money. Again, this was supposed to deter, in the government language, those who don't have papers, but in fact, it's racial profiling. And a lot of people who should be accessing healthcare are not accessing healthcare. And in the pandemic, many people died out of fear that hospitals are going to report them to immigration authorities. As I said, voting is really important. So a couple of years ago, we've launched Promote the Migrant Vote campaigns. So every election, and we had 3 in the last 3 years, we are onto it, and we work with groups around the country to make sure that they can organize, get out to vote, but also sign up. And in the last year's election, we worked with the Muslim Council of Britain and mosques, and that Friday when mosques were doing the registration drive was the highest registration day amongst minorities in the history of voter registration. We share and we learn from others, and this is in Ireland a couple of years ago, and you will see that Organise is spelled with S, and there is a bone of contention there between European or British and US colleagues. But it's really important to have culture and values that we practice always have to include learning and developing further. One of the things that we're also done is a campaign called MPs Not Border Guards, standing up to members of parliament who are reporting their constituents to immigration. And it's also really important that people know about your work and to be equipped to do media. And in the pandemic, and this is where I'm going to start wrapping up, we've also had to organize very quickly. But one of the first things that we had to organize around is digital access. So we had to raise money to buy digital access, as well as telephones and tablets for people who didn't have them. And then we joined with Black Lives Matter in this protest, and I Can't Breathe. This billboard is spelled with names of people who were killed as a result of structural state racism, including some of our members who were murdered while being deported or in detention, and people who died in a Grenfell Tower fire, which is in our neighborhood, and they were our members, and we were very stricken by grief and still grieve over that injustice. We've also very quickly wrestled up a research report on access to healthcare, and again done media coverage, and we've done the very quick 38 degrees petition, because it's really important for people to show their support. However, what we have experienced in the last couple of years in this form of hostile environment is that there is no change if we try to appeal to common sense or good values of the government. The government is intent on hostile environments. So we started thinking and organizing in a different kind of way. And this is a bunch of our leaders 2 years ago in Manchester, where we decided to pick a different route, and we started organizing around the similar campaign that exists in the United States, called Fair Immigration, a reform movement. And we really do not have a movement yet, but we're working to create one. And the essence of that movement is the charter, which spells out demands around 4 key areas that we have a positive vision of, because we felt that it's very counterproductive for us to just keep talking about how horrible things are, and we needed a vision and a movement to fix things. So we figured out these 4 areas, which is dignity, justice, welcome, and action, and put them out as demands. And some people say very strong demands. What was really important for us is to break down the justice into legal, international, and historic justice. And it's this idea of how colonialism is still framing a lot of oppression that we're experiencing, especially in this country. And international justice, again, to understand the movement of people, especially forced movement of people. We've also demand welcome, and that is because our demands should not be based on somebody else's charity, but on justice. And we also demand principled action and how we work together as a movement, and who should be listened and heard in this movement, which often smaller grassroots voices get lost in a wider debate of big NGOs. So far, 27 organizations signed up to these demands, including very recently Greenpeace, but also a very large platform for EU migrants in the UK, 3 million of them who are losing their rights over Brexit. We're organizing a weekend of action, which is going to be a vigil, remembering all people who died as a result of state racism and structural racism. And the banner under which all these actions are happening around the country is called Solidarity Knows No Borders. And I think that's really where I'm going to leave you, because I'm probably out of time. I'm just going to leave you with some of these really, what I think, cool looking graphics, which I think it's really important for the movement to also look good and to appeal to different people. And I think we've got another one that was really hard to make. But I think it includes all languages available on Google Translate. So if we miss the language, blame Google. So I'll stop there, and I know I've just rushed through some of the headlines, but I hope I've captured the essence of what we're trying to do, and our struggle and our desire to design and deliver a better world. And we've been described as hopeful realists. So I hope that's coming across. And I'm going to now stop talking and stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Zrinka, for that powerful keynote and very inspiring as ever. Now we will have, we'll give everybody a chance to ask questions.
Good morning, everyone. And I think it's afternoon where you're at, but it's about a little after 6 here. And congratulations again to the organizing team for this historic global summit on organizing. I think that's so important. And again, most importantly, at this time when we're so sequestered in our homes and in our communities and neighborhoods, that we're attempting to reach across the oceans and the countries to reach out our hands and to hug each other, because I think that's what I miss the most, is the hugging and the shaking of hands. But thank you, Zrinka, for your wonderful comments. I guess my takeaway, and as I was listening to her and talking about the migrant movements, and of course we're not all cookie cutter movements across the world, that when I talk with immigrants about organizing, I start with their own stories, as we always do, but that they learned naturally how to organize, because they, in many instances, they had to organize themselves to cross a border, to cross an ocean, to cross a desert. And they had to figure all of that out. They had to learn how to navigate different worlds without a language. And so that's why I think it's so important that we meet where people are, because number one, we learn from their experiences, but it's also an opportunity to teach them. They have natural organic skills that they developed when they had to cross the desert, cross the ocean, cross the river, and travel by train, travel by plane. They had to figure a lot of things out. And I think organizing is all about figuring things out and what drives you is what's important to you, and what's important to immigrants is a better life to live in dignity and with respect. And so that's why I think it's so important that creating immigrant movements are very natural, because we start with the skills that people have already brought to their welcoming country. So I just think that's such an important point to make in organizing immigrant movements. So thank you.
We have a question here in our chat. Could you, Zrinka, tell a little bit more about how you reach out to people to get active with you?
As Petra said, we meet people where they're at. So we go in, we've got a number of organizers. We also do casework and research. We organize Women on the Move Awards, where public and people nominate women who are organizers. So we find people in different ways and they find us. And the starting point is always for us to do some kind of power analysis as to what the problem is, what is the bigger issue, and then how can we work together to figure it out. It's always working together and also connecting people to each other. Throughout the lockdown, we continued first weekly, bi-weekly, and then monthly calls, national calls for organizers. And there's like around 30 people in the room, but they also are part of other networks and organizations. So there's thousands of people in the room. And that's one of the challenges for us, is that how do we create a safety network and for leaders and organizers, especially migrants and refugees, around them, so that they can actually speak from the movement. And I saw in the chat that somebody asked for that difference. So what's the difference between lived experience and speaking from the movement? So the difference for me is that I have lived experience, but when I just spoke about my lived experience was actually re-traumatizing me every time and making me less powerful, because I was just telling my story and then people would feel sorry for me and they would say, oh, that's terrible. And I found that either very depressing or enraging. So I needed to find like-minded people who can share other stories, but that we can create a framework on what needs to be done to change that I'm sorry into let's fix this. And that is structural, systemic. So I realized, and I used to be a journalist, so you know, I was kind of like, oh, there's only this magic way of me telling my story or somebody else telling their story that will change attitudes, and if only people will listen to facts. And unfortunately, that wasn't happening. So through necessity, we figured out that we need to connect with all migrants and refugees, different experiences, different migration experiences, different languages, different communities, different parts of the country, different times in history when we migrated, and that we need to figure out what are the structural problems that lead to continuous exclusion and scapegoating of migrants, and then what are the systemic and structural solutions. So when we share our stories, which are really important, that we can then link them to that structural analysis and say, and this is what your member of parliament should be doing, and this policy is wrong, and this is how we should be changing, and how we need to work together to change that policy. And as a result, the entire society is going to be better. So, so I think that's where I had to learn hard way through my own activism on the journey of being advocate activist into the journey of being an organizer. And that's, I suppose that's where one of the things that I always find is in that kind of defining the roles and language is also to, you know, we can't be exploitative. So if I'm part of the movement, there are other people like me. So I don't feel that stories and people's experience of being exploited for another cause or for fundraising or for something else, but that we own our stories and our demands for change. I hope that makes sense. One tiny point also on language, you know, we've fallen into the trap of saying, oh, we need to build capacity and we need to train. Actually, as Petra was saying, migrants and refugees already have capacity. They're resilient survivors. So it's about creating spaces where people can release that capacity in a productive and impactful way. And also, we don't do training because every exchange is a learning for everyone. So we'll do action planning or analysis or whatever, but it's mutually beneficial process of growth. So we grow our power together.
Thank you for that, for the answers, Zrinka. I think what struck me the most is when you said that, usually when you hear trainings, it's always about capacity building of migrants. And at first, when I was beginning my own journey in organizing, I was like, yeah, well, that's a good thing, right? When you build capacities. And then, like you said, then you realize, like, wait a minute, but I am already capable of doing things, right? It's a matter of giving space and having the space to actually develop yourself and to be more powerful to create that change that we see for ourselves. There's a question in our chat box again. Does the movement versus live experience also help keeping the movement or keep the movement sustainable, instead of exhausting one individual or running the risk of creating a one-person leadership model?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've learned in organizing, and I've spent a lot of time in the US, and I've actually trained in Josh's old organization in Southside Chicago and visited many others. And it was really powerful experience for me and a luxury in many ways, because I was just observing different ways of thinking about how we do this. And what I've learned is that the sustainability of the movement is how you set your own targets. So in organizing, one of the ways we measure what we do is that how many people have we developed in the process of doing something. So if you start measuring your work, so instead of saying, oh, I'm going to tick a box because 20 people came to my training, they came and they left. But if you say, we're measuring how many people we've developed, that's a totally different story, because you're folding them into the movement, you're bringing them on board, and you're handing over the baton. So the more the merrier. So if you start measuring your own impact and slot it around the values of organizing and participatory approach, then it becomes something really different. So then I don't have to go out and apply for funding and then say, oh, I'm going to develop 20 people. I might have to do that, but I also then have to think about, what is this movement going to look like if I break my leg? And unfortunately I did last year during the SNAP election. And if you came to see what Migrants Organise was doing, my absence was completely unnoticed, because there are other leaders amongst my team, and there are other leaders in a wider community of our members. And everybody knows what they're doing, and everybody knows why they're doing it. And when they don't, they know when and where and how to ask for knowledge and information. So, so we also have to create a community in which failure is accepted as a way of growing and learning, as opposed to saying, oh, aren't we great? Give us some money and we're going to save the world and save all migrants and refugees. Actually, we've been saving the world for the last 20 years, and things have never been worse for migrants and refugees everywhere in the world. So something is not working here. So we have responsibility to try different things and to try different ways of organizing and creating the change in the world. And I am convinced that community organizing, migrant organizing is the way forward in this kind of way.
Every time I listen to you, Zrinka, I always like, okay, when's the next movement? Where are we going to go next? Who are we going to fight for now? What are we going to fight for now? It's really inspiring.
Please come here and join me. I mean, we're in a process of organizing a big weekend of action in October. So everyone is welcome to join in online. It looks like there's going to be another lockdown, so we will have to pull back. But we're designing t-shirts, we're designing masks, we're designing online actions. We're doing whatever we can in order to connect the community, but we actually already have 22 real life actions around the country organized. So it's really important. I sometimes think, oh my God, this is horrible headache with all the risk analysis. Why are we doing this? But then the energy that comes from doing things together and growing together and developing new people around ourselves is really powerful. And there's always a gem that you find and you think, yes.
All right. I would love to join that 10-10.
I'll send it. Don't worry, you're not going to be able to avoid it.
Yeah. There's another question. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question, how do you protect? It's really difficult because you operate in a community of people, and we have definitely had situations where some of the big foundations would let us know that there are other organizations applying for funding, claiming that they're working with us, and they didn't even tell us, or they tell us when they get the funding. So there are situations in which you feel hijacked or exploited. It's really difficult to go high when they go low, but part of our values is not to waste our time fighting amongst ourselves, but to focus on productive change. And change, when you have impact, when you have change, the right people will know about it. So just make sure that you put it out there. So we have always found that our legitimacy is rooted in that attitude of just doing the work, and that we wouldn't want to work with anyone else who does not have the same values. So we always check what the values are and make sure that when we collaborate, those values are shared. So it is hard, but usually the truth comes out. So whoever tries to hijack will very quickly dissolve in the kind of nothingness, because building a base is really hard work, and the base needs to own it. So, Migrants Organise is not me or staff or anyone else, it's the people out there who step up to do the work. So if they're not willing to do the work and organize, and if they don't believe in it, then nothing's going to happen. So usually the kind of empty shells collapse very quickly. And my approach has always been not to waste my time.
That's a good approach, I think, not wasting your time. But there's Josh is actually asked in the chat room, is how do you stay clear on the need to organize and develop leaders and not fall into the foundation program jargon and mumbo jumbo? I like the mumbo jumbo part.
Yeah, because my people won't let me. So that's the thing. So keeping, like, I am a chief executive and I have a lot of responsibilities in terms of fundraising and policy work and staff management, but I'm also an organizer. So I keep at least 12 organizing relationships around the country going. So I do day-to-day organizing, and I do 5 one-to-ones a week. So there's really important kind of discipline of organizing, when Josh knows, and that's why he's asking, because he's doing the same thing. And also learning to kind of have understanding, analysis of different audiences. So understanding of what they want from you, and sometimes if we can't give it to them, we will say, sorry, we don't do that. And we have actually been known as an organization to refuse funding or to give money back, because we felt that it would compromise what we're trying to do. And at the beginning of pandemic, at least 7 big foundations just gave us money with no questions asked. And we were able to continue doing our work and actually expand and grow and employ 2 new people, which is, in the economy where 10 million people were furloughed, that is an achievement and recognition. But we have not budged in on any of our principles or any on our values. And we use exactly the same language in public with our members and with foundations and with our partners. And because we can justify, and if anyone has any questions, we can guide them through A to Z process of what structural racism means and how it is reflected in our work. and why we need systemic and structural change. So we're not just throwing words. When I say this is fascism, I have evidence to prove where and how this fascism plays out in the daily experience of migrants and refugees. So being very backed by evidence is really important, and knowing what you're talking about is also really important, but also then having spaces for people to come in and work with you rather than just saying, oh, you know, this is us, this is you. No, we need to be like that. Alliance building, I think, is the most challenging, that building of common ground. And that's where I found organizing, the art of organizing, really helpful.
But yeah, I think one of the things that struck me the most about Migrants Organize is, like what you said, you turned down funding, right? And this is actually one of the things that most, I mean, organizers and those with like me coming from the NGO background, is like funding is the biggest question mark of all, right? So can you tell us a little bit more as well as like, how did it all, you know, started, and you know, like how did you make sure that funding will be at some point in the future be more sustainable than, you know, of course, in the beginning, it's probably like most organizations are struggling with funding, and how you get from there to here.
So one of the challenges is that how do we present the argument that we actually know what needs doing in order to create change, as opposed to following what foundations are saying they will fund to create change. And so sometimes foundations will work on a basis of research. Research is 2 years behind the reality. So how do you create credibility in order to show that somebody should give you X amount of money to deliver A, B, C, D, and especially in organizing, where you can't just do, here are the outcomes, and it's very processy. It's not outcome oriented in a traditional sense. So it's really working and educating people on the method, but a lot of the time what we do, we do pilots at Migrants Organise with no funding. So is this sustainable? Are there people out there that will do this? Then we look at it, evaluate it, and then we say, this is what we've done. With more money, we think we can do more of this, and this will be the impact. And that's built into our understanding of the world and our theory of change. And in fact, our theory of change comes from the paper written for foundations. So everything is sourced and linked up. And basically they say that, you know, you need, in order to change the world, you need to change basic attitudes, prevailing attitudes in the mainstream. And that means, you know, creating a movement, and movement should be led by the people affected by the issue. And you need to do a bit of research, and you need to do a bit of campaigning, but essentially you need people affected by the issue leading that movement for change. So none of us would expect feminism to be led by men. And yet somehow we expect the movement for migrant and refugee rights to be led by NGOs, professionals. And some of them have people with lived experience, and many of them will not. And who are they accountable to is also challenging, because they will have boards that they're accountable to and funders. So how truly are you accountable to people affected by the issue who you say, whose interest you're representing? So that is really hard. But once you get to the other side, and we're very fortunate in a sense in the UK that there are a number of foundations that are led by staff who used to work in this field, but also connected to the US, where there was a huge impact by a number of foundations who decided to pull together funding for immigrant organizing, especially for voter registration. And that is really, it's important to kind of be in a dialogue. So we work with our foundations that are funding us, as opposed to kind of depending on them for funding. But one of the attractions of organizing for me is that essentially organizing is a way of living for most of us. So we should and ought to be able to do it without funding. And at Migrants Organise, we started doing it after the 2008 financial crash, when we nearly closed down and lost the funding. So it's one of those ways of working together, like why people join political parties, and even pay, or trade unions, that people pay membership in order to work together. And in many organizing movements, actually members pay dues. Our challenge is that our members a lot of the time are not allowed to work and live in a very precarious economic situation. So it would not be fair for us to ask for them to pay. But in many other organizing movements and forms of organizing, people fund their own organizing.
Two more questions in the chat room. Melis is asking, you said we are obviously doing something wrong because we are where we are. Can you share one failure from Migrants Organise? Because we learned from our mistakes. I want to learn from yours.
I have a long list. My failures are a lot of the time around wasted time and energy. So once we've organized the summit that went on, it was a residential summit, and 140 migrant leaders came from around the country, and we raised funds to pay for it. And we were supposed to spend, this was our first residential. And we went to a university. That first mistake was they didn't understand us, so they closed the bar. It was a massive mistake, because the most important thing in meetings happen outside meetings, where people socialize. And the second biggest mistake of that one, I'm just talking about one event, is that because there were so many people, we panicked and we didn't do rounds. And colleagues will know how passionate I feel about rounds and how important it is for everyone in the room to speak, to introduce themselves, and to say something about themselves, and so that we hear everyone's voice. And I always feel enormously inspired and encouraged after I hear from everyone in the room. And we now do that on Zoom calls. And sometimes if we skip rounds, people actually feel it. So rounds can take up a lot of time, like if you have 30 people and if everyone speaks 2 to 5 minutes. But actually for me, that's the best use of our time. So we shouldn't be measuring time on what we're doing after the rounds. We should be measuring time in what we do about rounds. And that's also because I believe that people are at their best in the presence of very good, incisive questions. So rather than kind of being, woolly about introductions, if we have a structure of rounds is really good. And also we all learn then to stay within time. And those of you who were in Dublin, you will remember my way of managing time. Was to have 2 minutes and then applause. So there are respectful ways of cutting people and stopping people from going over time. And then very quickly people self-discipline. So those are, I would say, there's like everything that we do, we always do a little evaluation afterwards. And then we say, okay, well, this didn't work. And then we're going to try differently next time.
Like some kind of debrief then. But I really like the first biggest mistake, like Josh and Teresa saying now here, is like, they closed the bar. Oh no.
I know.
Why? Yes. And there's another question. I think this can be our last, I think this will be our last question for this public keynote. It's like, how do you show that you understand the systems in which you are trying to create change?
I think we all have responsibility to learn and educate ourselves and to find out and to nurture in ourselves and people around us critical thinking. And obviously I come from a different culture, so I was very shocked at how in this educational system in the UK, critical thinking has been removed. And it's only part of very privileged education in private schools where all our politicians go. So So I think for me, that is probably the most important, that we all have responsibility for our own development and learning and for finding out. I mean, I'm now in a process of learning and understanding what is this debate and a fight between J.K. Rowling on trans rights. And I'm asking everyone to send me resources, links, videos, because I don't know anything about it and I want to understand, because I'm a feminist, but the word feminist has been used in acronym that seems to be denying rights to another group of people who are also oppressed. So it is my responsibility then to learn and to find out. So as a community, we read together, we share resources together, we discuss things, and a lot of the time, you know, especially younger organizers will say, oh, I'm busy, I don't have time to read this book. And I'm like, everybody has the time to read one book a month. That is absolutely unacceptable. If you don't, then we need to talk about how to structure your time so that you have time. But it's really important to be part of that learning community at the same time. And to be quite honest, I miss that. That's one of the things that I miss in lockdown, is kind of Ring of Fire debate club. Because I think I'm an extrovert, and even though that's very valued in Western cultures over introverts, I find it difficult because I think as I speak, and not having opportunity to interact or to have a more personal exchange of ideas, because Zooms are all about doing something quickly. I find I miss that. I miss learning and growing. And I think the moment we all stop learning and growing, we're damaging ourselves and then everyone around us.
Yeah. Thank you. I really like what you said, that, you know, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves. And this is also one thing that I realized while I was like busy working in this NGO role and things like that, that I don't have the time to read, and I really miss that. And I agree with you that it's one way to really educate ourselves to become better organizers. So I think we're running out of time, but I still want to ask you, like, now we have really amazing, powerful migrant organizers joining us for this summit, community organizers joining us for this summit. There's also people watching us live on Facebook from all over. What would be your main message to us as organizers? Something that, you know, that you think is really important nowadays, especially that we are facing all kinds of crises, especially this COVID and pandemic and all these things that we're all in lockdown. Message to our fellow organizers.
Apart from the obvious, get organized, is organized for action. I think that's really important. We should not give up the idea of doing actions together, because that generates energy, but it's also important for us to continue to have our voices out there, to generate, to inspire, to mobilize, because every action is an opportunity to get more people involved, to get more people to hear about the issue. And I think there's a huge fight ahead of us, and the world is messed up as it is. So we need to be sharing that vision of what better world could be like. So, you know, I'm rereading Hope in the Dark right now, so I'm really hopeful. But I think that's also part of our responsibility, is to not to explain ourselves, but to recruit, inspire, and bring people on board that will understand and be our champions as well. So I think that would be my final parting message.
Recruit, inspire, get people on board, organize for action. That's a very powerful message, Zrinka. Thank you so much for this keynote. I hope everyone will agree that we're all inspired now, and we're now looking forward to, okay, where are we going to go next to fight for everything that's going on?
I know. I'm going into the Google Classroom now.
All right. Thank you so much.